A
You may
billionaire's
now
daughter
kiss
risks
the
her
bride.
inheritance for a love that promises nothing but a chance to build a life of their own. Hello, bestie. Welcome. Please stay with me as I unfold this interesting romantic story. If you enjoy the story, please support us by subscribing to this channel and hit the notification button for more. Thank you. Grab your popcorn, sit back, relax, and enjoy this story. The Lagos sun, a fierce and brilliant orb, beat down upon the sprawling metropolis. But in the penthouse of the Ikoyi Towers, the world was kept at a perfect, polished 22 degrees Celsius. Adesuwa Adeyemi stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the breathtaking panorama of the city skyline and the distant glint of the Atlantic Ocean. From this height, the chaotic, vibrant energy of Lagos seemed like a silent movie, a world she observed but could no longer touch. 30. Adesuwa had everything. The phrase was a constant, whispered by society pages and echoed in the envious murmurs at parties. Adesuwa Adeyemi has everything. Everything, it turned out, could feel an awful lot like nothing. Her everything was a curated collection of obligations. The weight of it pressed on her shoulders, heavier than the exquisite gold-threaded geli currently being expertly tied by her stylist, Bimp. Just a little more to the side. Ma, Bimp murmured, her fingers deftly manipulating the stiff Ankara fabric. Tonight must be perfect. Tonight was the annual Adeyemi Foundation Gala, one of the most coveted events on the Lagos social calendar. It was a night of breathtaking philanthropy, where millions of naira would be pledged for worthy causes, all under the glittering chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the Eco Hotel. And Adesuwa, as the only daughter of Chief Olumide Adeyemi, was its princess consort. Her attendance was not optional. It was a strategic requirement. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman of impossible elegance. Her makeup was flawless, her custom-designed, champagne-colored lace iro and buba fit her like a second skin, and the diamond studs in her ears were worth more than most people's annual salaries. She looked the part. She always looked the part. Adesuwa, are you listening? The voice, deep and accustomed to command, came from behind her. Chief Olumide Adeyemi entered the room, a man who didn't just occupy space but claimed it. His agbada was of the finest Swiss voile, embroidered with a subtle, powerful pattern that whispered of wealth and influence, not shouted it. He was a man who built empires, oil, real estate, banking, and expected his family to be a seamless extension of his legacy. Yes, Daddy, she said, her voice a smooth, practiced calm. She turned from the window, offering him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Good. The governor has confirmed. I need you to ensure you're seated next to his son, Toby, during dinner. He's just returned from his MBA at Harvard. Sharp boy. Good family. The unspoken words hung in the air-conditioned air. A suitable boy. Potential match. I'll make sure of it, Daddy, Adesuwa replied, the words tasting like ash. Toby was nice enough like the last one and the one before that. All sharp boys from good families. They were mirrors, reflecting back her own gilded reality, offering a future that was just an extension of her present. Her father's phone buzzed, a silent vibration against the walnut desk. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. The traffic from Victoria Island is a nightmare. We'll need to leave in 20 minutes. Don't be late. He left as abruptly as he arrived, his attention already soldered to the next crisis. The door clicked shut, and the room felt both emptier and somehow more suffocating. Bimp finished the geli, creating a majestic crown that added a foot to Adesuwa's height. You look beautiful, Ma, she said, gathering her tools. Like a queen in a gilded cage, Adesuwa thought but did not say. When she was alone, she walked back to the window. Her eyes drifted down from the skyline, past the manicured gardens of the estate, to the busy street barely visible beyond the high walls. From up here, the people were just specks, a moving tapestry of life. She imagined the sounds. The hawkers' calls, the blare of Danfo horns, the laughter, the arguments, the messy, chaotic, living reality of it all. Her own life was a series of silent, air-conditioned rooms. Board meetings where her opinions were politely heard but ultimately overshadowed by her father's. charity events where she was a beautiful prop, dates with suitable men who talked about stock portfolios and foreign investments. Her only rebellion was a secret. Tucked away in her platinum Hermes handbag was a simple, unbranded phone. On it were the plans for her weekly visit to the Promise, a small, underfunded children's shelter in Surulere. There, she wasn't Adesua Adeyemi, the billionaire's daughter. To the children, she was just Auntie Aids, who helped with homework and brought new books and paints. She touched the cool glass of the window, her diamond ring clicking against it. The gala, the governor's son, the perfect, polished performance. It was her duty. It was the price of admission to this cage. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she turned her back on the city. The reflection in the glass now showed only the impeccable heiress, her face a mask of serene composure. The woman inside, the one who longed for something real, something messy, something that was truly hers, was locked deep away. She picked up her bag, feeling the weight of the secret phone within it. It was a tiny key, but for now the cage was still locked. Everything, she whispered to her reflection, and walked out to play her part. The grand ballroom of the Eco Hotel was a symphony of controlled opulence. Crystal chandeliers scattered light like captured stars across the room, glinting off gold cutlery and the jewels adorning Lagos Elite. The air hummed with a low, polished murmur of conversations about mergers, acquisitions, and the latest political gossip, all underscored by the smooth, inoffensive jazz from a live band. Adesua Adeyemi moved through the throng with the effortless grace of a deep-sea current, a fixed, diplomatic smile on her lips. She had already charmed the governor, endured 20 minutes of Toby from Harvard's detailed analysis of the emerging markets, and successfully auctioned off a weekend getaway to Dubai for a sum that made even her father nod in approval. It was all a perfectly executed ballet, and she was its lead dancer, performing steps she knew by heart. But with every hand she shook, every air kiss she bestowed, the walls of the gilded cage seemed to press in a little closer. A stunning success, as always, Adesua, a family friend, Mrs. Okafor, purred, gripping her arm. Your father must be so proud. Now you must tell me that dress is from? Adesua answered on autopilot, her mind already drifting towards the silent auction area, a slightly quieter section of the ballroom where donated items were displayed for bids. It was her designated escape route, a place she could feign deep interest in a piece of art to steal a few moments of solitude. She glided past tables of luxury watches, signed football jerseys, and holiday packages, her eyes scanning without truly seeing. And then she stopped. Amidst the glittering, predictable offerings, something raw and powerful demanded her attention. It was a sculpture, about 3 feet tall, titled simply, It wasn't polished or pretty. It was a compelling chaos of materials. Smooth, dark mahogany carved into the form of a powerful, rising figure, a man or perhaps a spirit, its upper body bursting forth in a cascade of rusted iron, copper wire, and shattered ceramic pieces that looked like ancient pottery shards. The figure's face was partially obscured, turned upward, one hand outstretched as if commanding the elements themselves. It was fierce, beautiful, and spoke of a strength that was earned, not inherited. It was the antithesis of everything in the room. Adesua found herself drawn to it, her perfectly rehearsed smile fading into a look of genuine awe. She reached out, almost touching the rough texture of the iron, before pulling her hand back. It's meant to be touched, a voice said behind her. It was a calm, warm voice, devoid of the practiced slickness she was accustomed to. She turned. He was young, younger than most of the men in the room. He stood uncomfortably in a crisp, white agbada that looked like it had been taken out of its packaging an hour ago. But it wasn't the clothes she noticed. It was his eyes. They were intelligent, observant, and held a quiet intensity that seemed to look directly through her elegant facade. In his hands, he nervously turned a small, paint-stained cloth over and over. It's incredible, Adesua said, her usual eloquence failing her. The energy of it. It's not just art to be looked at. It's art to be felt. A slight, relieved smile touched his lips. That was the idea. It isn't a quiet power. It's a command. It should feel disruptive. Disruptive, she repeated, the word feeling dangerous and thrilling in this setting. Imadesawa Adeyemi. She offered her hand out of habit, the gesture as much a part of her as her name. He looked at her hand for a brief second, then wiped his own on the cloth before shaking it. His grip was firm, his fingers calloused. I know who you are, he said simply. No flattery, no fawning. Just a statement of fact. Chuka. Chuka Okeke. I made that. Chuka, she said, his name feeling solid and real on her tongue. This is for the youth center? In Surulere? His eyes lit up, the nervousness replaced by passion. Yes, the promise. The bids on this will fund the entire art program for a year. Maybe buy a new roof that doesn't leak during the rainy season. He spoke about the center not as a charity case, but as a living, breathing community. He talked about the kids, their names, their talents, their frustrations. He described his vision for a proper studio space, not with the grandiose language of her father's board meetings, but with the practical excitement of someone who planned to mix the paint and build the shelves himself. Adesawa was captivated. For 10 minutes, the dull roar of the gala faded into nothingness. There was no Chief Adeyemi, no legacy, no expectations. There was just this young man with intense eyes and a vision, and a piece of art that seemed to vibrate with a truth she'd been starving for. You should come, he said abruptly, as if the invitation escaped before he could stop it. To the center. See the work they're doing. The mural on the back wall is, well, it's something else. It was the most improper, ill-advised suggestion. A billionaire's daughter, visiting a struggling youth center in Surulere? Her father would have an aneurysm. She should politely decline. She should make an excuse. She should return to Toby from Harvard and the governor's son. Instead, she heard herself say, I'd like that very much. At that moment, she saw her father's head of security, a large man in a dark suit, begin to make his way toward them through the crowd. Her time was up. I have to go, she said, the mask of the heiress slipping back into place, but it felt tighter than before. It was truly a pleasure to meet you, Chuka Okeke. He nodded, those keen eyes missing nothing. You too, Adesawa. Then he paused. Can I call you Aids? The question was so startlingly informal, so utterly devoid of the deference she lived with, that a genuine, uncalculated laugh escaped her. It was a short, surprised sound that felt foreign and wonderful. Yes, she said, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time all evening. I think I'd like that. As she was led back into the heart of the ballroom, the weight of her gelly felt heavier, the diamonds colder against her skin. But tucked away in her mind was the image of a sculpture made of rust and wood, and the sound of a name she'd never heard before. It was a key, and for the first time she felt a desperate urge to turn it in the lock. The following week was a blur of obligations, each one a heavier link in the chain that bound her to her life. Board meetings, a luncheon for the wives of diplomats, a site visit to one of her father's new properties. Through it all, Adesawa moved with her customary grace, but her mind was elsewhere. It was in a vibrant, chaotic studio in Surulere, fixated on a sculpture made of rough-hewn wood and rusted iron, and on the calloused hand of the man who created it. The secret phone in her Hermes bag felt like a live wire. She found herself checking it compulsively, a habit she'd never had before. Finally, 2 days after the gala, a message appeared from an unknown number. It was simple, direct, and utterly devoid of the polished prose she was used to. This is Chuka. The center is open tomorrow, 3 p.m. If you're still interested. Her heart did a funny little skip. If you're still interested. As if the thought hadn't been consuming her. She typed a reply, her fingers clumsy with a nervous energy she couldn't place. I am. They'll be there. She sent it before she could second-guess herself. The next day, she executed a complex logistical maneuver worthy of a military operation. She had her driver, Emmanuel, take her to a high-end boutique in Victoria Island for a fitting. Once inside, she slipped out the back entrance, hailed a regular yellow taxi, a thrillingly anonymous act in itself, and gave the address in Surulere. The journey was a sensory assault. The air in the taxi was thick with the scent of the driver's pomade and the dusty, petrol-tinged breeze from the open window. The sounds of the city, muffled and distant in Ikoyi, were here a vibrant, deafening symphony. The incessant blare of horns, the shouts of market traders, the percussive rhythm of Afrobeat bursting from a roadside speaker. She watched the landscape change from sleek glass towers to crowded, bustling streets lined with open-fronted shops and colorful Danfo buses packed with people. She arrived feeling strangely exhilarated and entirely out of place, her simple linen trousers and silk blouse marking her as an outsider. The Promise Youth Center was a low, sprawling building painted a fading but cheerful blue. The wall facing the street was indeed covered in a magnificent, sprawling mural. It depicted a phoenix rising not from flames, but from a pile of discarded plastic bottles and scrap metal, its wings spread over a map of Lagos. It was bold, hopeful, and undeniably talented. She found Chuka not in an office, but outside in the dusty courtyard, surrounded by a group of enraptured teenagers. He was on a ladder, demonstrating how to mix spray paint cans to create a specific shade of orange. He wore faded jeans and a t-shirt stained with a rainbow of colors, a far cry from the uncomfortable man in the rented Agbada. He saw her and paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You came," he said, as if Head half expected her not to. "I said I would," she replied, her own smile feeling easier now. He introduced her simply as my friend, AIDS, and the kids, with the brutal honesty of youth, sized her up before quickly accepting her presence and returning their focus to Chuka and his lesson. For the next hour, Adesawa simply watched. She watched him patiently correct a handhold, his voice low and encouraging. She watched the fierce concentration on the kids' faces, the pride when a line went exactly where they wanted it to. This was not charity as she knew it. This was not writing a check from a distance. This was hands in the dirt, sharing knowledge, building something tangible. It was the most real thing she had witnessed in years. When the lesson ended, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "Hungry?" Chuka asked, wiping his hands on a rag that seemed to make them dirtier. "Starving," she admitted. He led her not to a restaurant, but to a roadside suya spot a few blocks away. The vendor, an older man with a magnificent grin, greeted Chuka by name. They sat on simple plastic stools as the man expertly sliced spicy, roasted meat from a skewer, sprinkled it with diced onions and yaji pepper, and wrapped it in old newspaper. Adesawa hesitated for only a second before taking a bite. The flavors exploded in her mouth. Smoky, spicy, utterly delicious. She laughed, a real unguarded sound, as the pepper brought tears to her eyes. "This is incredible," she sputtered, reaching for a bottle of water. Chuka just grinned. "Told you. Better than any canopy at the Eco Hotel." They talked as the sky darkened. He asked her questions no one ever asked her. Not about her father's business, but about her. What she loved to read, historical fiction, a secret vice. What music she listened to when no one was around, 90s or VEB, another secret. What she would do if she could do anything. In return, he told her about growing up in Enugu, the son of teachers who scrimped and saved to buy him his first set of proper paints. He spoke of his dream not of fame, but of a self-sustaining studio that could train a new generation of Nigerian artists. He called her AIDS again, and the name felt like a gift. As a familiar black SUV with tinted windows pulled up discreetly at the end of the street, Emmanuel right on time, Adesawa felt a profound sense of loss. The spell was breaking. "I have to go," she said, her voice soft. Chuka nodded, his expression unreadable in the twilight. "Back to the castle?" It wasn't said with malice, but with a gentle acknowledgement of the vast divide between them. "Something like that," she sighed. She stood up, brushing the newspaper crumbs from her lap. "Thank you, Chuka, for today, for all of it." "Anytime, AIDS," he said. "The door is always open." The ride back to Ikoyi was silent. The world outside the taxi window now seemed muted, gray, and distant. The taste of suya and pepper still lingered on her lips, a delicious, spicy secret. She leaned her head against the cool glass, replaying the afternoon in her mind. The vibrant colors of the mural, the focus in the children's eyes, the feel of the rough plastic stool, the sound of his voice saying her name. The cage was still there, but for a few hours she had forgotten its bars entirely. And that forgetting felt more like freedom than anything she had ever known. The secret visits to Surulere became Adesua's oxygen. Once, sometimes twice a week, she would execute her carefully planned escape. The boutique in Victoria Island became her regular alibi. The driver, Emmanuel, a man of few words and immense discretion, began to understand the unspoken routine. He would wait, engine idling on a quiet side street, while his Oga madam slipped into a world he could only glimpse. In the dusty, sunlit courtyard of the Promise, Adesua shed her identity like a heavy coat. She wasn't Adesua Adeyemi, the heiress. She was Auntie Aids, who could surprisingly hold her own in a debate about the best brand of spray paint, who helped a shy girl named Neka sketch a portrait of her mother, and who laughed until her sides ached at the kids' playful banter. And there was Chuka. Their conversations flowed as easily as the Ogun River after the rains. They debated everything from the symbolism in Fela's music to the best jollof rice recipe. He was team party jollof. She was stubbornly team home-cooked. He taught her about the history of Nigerian modern art. She offered sharp, insightful business advice on how he could price his pieces and find new galleries. They were a perfect, if unlikely, fit. One afternoon, they were sitting on the low wall surrounding the courtyard, sharing a bottle of chilled Malta Guinness. The kids had gone home, and the center was quiet, bathed in the golden light of the fading sun. Chuka was sketching idly in a pad, and Adesua was watching his hands, fascinated by the sure, confident lines they created. "You have a meeting with that gallery owner in Ikoyi next week," she reminded him, slipping effortlessly into her manager role. "Remember, don't let him lowball you on the commission. Your work is worth every kobo." Chuka looked up from his sketch, a playful glint in his eye. "Yes, Ma," he said with a mock salute. "I have my very own Ikoyi strategist." "Who would have thought?" She nudged him with her shoulder. "Stop it. I'm serious. You need to value your A." He held her gaze for a moment, the playfulness softening into something warmer, more sincere. "I do," he said quietly. "More than you know." The air between them shifted, charged with an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. Adesua's heart hammered against her ribs. Her phone, the real one, buzzed insistently in her bag. It was the 5th missed call from her mother. The real world was crashing back in, its summons urgent and angry. "I have to go," she said, her voice slightly breathless. He simply nodded, his eyes still on hers. "See you next time, Aids." The ride back to Ikoyi was tense. Emmanuel was uncharacteristically silent. When they arrived at the towering gates of the Adeyemi estate, the usual security detail seemed heightened. The gates swung open too slowly, as if reluctant to let her in. The atmosphere inside the house was arctic. Her father was not in his study, as was his evening custom. He was standing in the grand living room, a crystal tumbler of brandy in his hand, his back to the door. Her mother, Neka, was perched on the edge of a silk settee, her posture rigid, a single handkerchief twisted tightly in her hands. "Adesua." Her father's voice was low, a controlled rumble that was more frightening than any shout. "Daddy, Mummy, is everything all right?" she asked, feigning ignorance, her galanite mask snapping into place. Her father turned. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Do not," he said, each word a shard of ice, "insult my intelligence. Where have you been?" "I was at a fitting, and then I had coffee with—" "Enough!" The word exploded in the quiet room, making her flinch. He slammed the tumbler down on a side table, the liquid sloshing over the edge. "Do you think I am a fool? Do you think my drivers do not talk? That my security team has no eyes? You have been seen, repeatedly, in Surulere, with that boy." The word boy was laced with so much venom it made her own anger rise, hot and defensive. His name is Chuka, she said, her voice steady though her knees trembled. And he is a talented, respectable artist. I am helping him with his business. Helping him? Her mother interjected, her voice strained with anxiety. Adesuwa Omo mi, what are you thinking? Do you know what people are saying? The daughter of Chief Adeyemi. Slumming it with some roadside painter? It is a scandal. It is not a scandal. He's brilliant, and the work he does at the youth center is important. It's more meaningful than any of these pointless parties. Her father took a step closer, his presence dominating the room. Meaningful? You speak to me of meaning? I have spent my life building an empire, securing a legacy for this family. Your meaning is to uphold that legacy, not drag it through the mud of Surulere for a childish infatuation. It is not an infatuation. The truth of the declaration shocked even her. He sees me, the real me, not just the Adeyemi name. And what will he see when the money is gone? Her father shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. When he has drained you of your trust fund and his talent fails to put food on the table. What is his family name? What is his prospect? Answer me. The questions hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Adesuwa had no answer that would satisfy him. Chuka's prospects weren't measured in naira or oil blocks. Neka stood, her eyes pleading. Please, Adesuwa, end this, now, before it goes too far. He is from a different world. These things never last. They only bring heartache and shame. Think of your future. Think of us. Adesuwa looked from her mother's desperate face to her father's implacable one. The gilded cage she lived in had never felt more real. The doors were slamming shut. Chief Adeyemi delivered the final blow, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. This ends tonight. You will not see him again. You will not call him. You will not text him. Your phone will be changed. Your movements will be monitored. This friendship is over. Do you understand me? It wasn't a question. It was an edict. Adesuwa felt a cold defiance settle in her stomach. She looked her father directly in the eye, the daughter of a billionaire finally ready to fight. No, she said, her voice quiet but clear as glass. I want. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the shouting. She had never directly disobeyed him before. Her father's eyes narrowed. If you defy me, Adesuwa, there will be consequences. Severe consequences. Do not test me. He turned and walked out of the room, the finality in his footsteps echoing through the marble halls. Her mother let out a soft sob and followed him. Adesuwa stood alone in the vast, opulent room, the confrontation leaving her trembling. But amidst the fear and anger, a new feeling emerged. A fierce, unshakable resolve. They had given her an ultimatum, and she had already chosen her answer. The Adeyemi household became a fortress, and Adesuwa its most closely guarded prisoner. Her personal phone was confiscated, replaced by a new, sterile device whose contacts contained only family, approved associates, and the ever-present Toby from Harvard. Emmanuel was reassigned. Her new driver, a stern, silent man named Gabriel, was given explicit instructions. No deviations, no unscheduled stops. Her movements were tracked, her schedule vetted. The gilded cage was now a panopticon, every bar reinforced. But love, especially a love born in the defiant sunlight of Surulere, finds a way. Their communication became a thrilling, dangerous game of espionage. Adesuwa used the secret phone, the one dedicated to the charity, to send coded messages. A question about donating art supplies was a request to talk. A comment on the children's progress was a declaration of missing him. Chuka, understanding the stakes, was ingenious. He created a new email address under the name of a fictional art supplier. Their correspondence was buried in mundane discussions about canvas prices and pigment quality, with personal messages hidden in the middle of long paragraphs. Sometimes, a young apprentice from the promise would be stationed near the gates of the Adeyemi estate, selling bottled water or peanuts. Tucked amongst the wares would be a folded note, a quick sketch, a single flower. It was reckless and romantic, and it kept them alive. Their meetings were rare, stolen miracles. A brief, heart-pounding encounter in the back aisle of a crowded bookstore in Ikja City Mall, their fingers brushing as they reached for the same volume of Chinua Achebe. A 5-minute conversation disguised as a chance meeting at a public art exhibition, surrounded by people, yet feeling utterly alone together. Each moment was a spark in the overwhelming darkness, precious and unsustainable. The strain began to show on Adesuwa. The constant vigilance, the lies, the weight of her double life carved new lines of worry on her face. She picked at her food, her appetite gone. The lavish meals prepared by the family chef tasted like ash. A persistent, low-level nausea became her constant companion, which she attributed to stress. It was during a particularly interminable family dinner. Toby from Harvard was their guest, holding forth on macroeconomic trends, that the truth announced itself with sudden, violent clarity. The smell of the spicy pepper soup, usually a comfort, hit her like a physical blow. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the room tilting on its axis. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her skin clammy and pale. "Adesuwa, are you quite all right?" Toby asked, his voice laced with concern. She couldn't answer. Pushing her chair back with a screech, she fled the dining room, barely making it to the nearest powder room before she was violently, wretchedly sick. Her mother was there in an instant, her face a mask of alarm that quickly hardened into a dawning, terrifying suspicion. She held Adesuwa's hair back, her touch cold and impersonal. When the heaving subsided, Nneka Adeyemi didn't offer a glass of water or a word of comfort. She stared at her daughter's reflection in the mirror, her eyes wide with horror. "This stress, this nonsense, it is making you sick," Nneka said, but her voice lacked conviction. It was a hope, a prayer she didn't believe. Adesuwa rinsed her mouth, her hands shaking. The thought, wild and terrifying, had already taken root in her own mind. She was late, very late. She had been so consumed with the struggle that she hadn't even noticed. The next 48 hours were a blur of silent dread. She managed to acquire a pregnancy test from a pharmacy during a sanctioned trip to a high-end beauty store, hiding the box like contraband. She waited until the house was asleep, the silence oppressive, to lock herself in her bathroom. The minutes it took for the result to appear were the longest of her life. She sat on the cold marble floor, knees drawn to her chest, praying, bargaining, fearing. When she finally looked, 2 bold, pink lines stared back at her. A definitive answer, a life sentence, a miracle. A storm of emotions engulfed her, sheer, unadulterated terror at her father's reaction, a dizzying, profound joy at the life growing within her, a fierce, protective instinct that eclipsed everything else. She had to tell Chuka. It took 2 agonizing days to get a message to him through their art supplier email, arranging a call. She used the landline in her father's study, the one line she knew wasn't monitored, late at night when she was sure he was asleep. "Chuka," she whispered into the receiver, her voice trembling. "AIDS? What's wrong? Are you all right?" His voice was instantly alert, laced with the fear their situation had bred. She took a shuddering breath, the words sticking in her throat. "I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end was absolute. She could hear the faint sounds of Surelier traffic in the background of his life, a world away. She braced for panic, for fear, for regret. What she heard instead was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a sound that was pure, unvarnished wonder. "AIDS," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Really?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Really?" Another beat of silence, and then his voice came through, clear and steady as a rock in a raging river. "Okay, listen to me. It's going to be okay. Whatever happens, we are in this together. You, me, and this baby. Do you hear me? Together. No hesitation. No questions about what it meant for his future, his art, his freedom. Just immediate, unwavering commitment." It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The terror receded, not gone, but overshadowed by a wave of love so powerful it stole her breath. She wept then, silent tears of relief and fear and overwhelming love. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones, making plans, promising each other strength. When she finally hung up, the room felt different. The opulent study, a monument to her father's power, no longer intimidated her. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. She was no longer just Adesewa Adeyemi, the defiant daughter. She was a mother, and a mother, she was beginning to understand, was the most powerful force in the world. She had to tell her parents. The storm that had been brewing for weeks was about to break. But now she was no longer a girl caught in the rain. She was a shelter, and she would not be moved. For 3 days, Adesewa moved through the mansion like a ghost. The secret within her was a live wire, humming with a terrifying, joyous energy. She practiced the words in her head, 1,000 different ways to break the news, each one ending in cataclysm. She chose her moment with the strategic precision of a general going into a battle she knew she could not win, but could not avoid. She requested a private family dinner. No Toby, no associates, just the 3 of them. Her father had grunted his approval, likely assuming it was her way of apologizing, of signaling her surrender. Her mother had looked hopeful, her smile brittle. The dinner was a silent, tense affair. The only sounds were the delicate clink of silverware on fine china and the low hum of the air conditioning. Adesewa pushed her food around her plate. Her appetite vanished, the ifo riro and pounded yam tasting like sawdust. "You are not eating, Adesewa," her mother noted, her voice tight with concern. "This stress you have put on yourself. It is not good for you. You have no idea," Adesewa thought. She waited until the dessert course, a delicate chocolate soufflé that none of them touched, had been served and the staff had discreetly withdrawn. This was it, the point of no return. She placed her napkin neatly on the table, her hands trembling slightly. She took a sip of water to steady her voice. "Daddy, Mummy." Her voice was quiet but clear in the vast dining room. "There is something I need to tell you." Chief Adeyemi looked up from his phone, his expression one of mild impatience. Nneka froze, a spoonful of soufflé halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with sudden dread. "I am," Adesewa began, the words catching in her dry throat. She tried again, forcing them out. "I am pregnant." The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical force, thick and heavy, sucking all the air from the room. It was the profound, deafening quiet before the earthquake hits. Her father's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The impatience melted into confusion, then hardened into disbelief, and finally settled into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. The color drained from his face, then flooded back in a dark, dangerous crimson. Nneka made a small, choked sound. The spoon clattered onto her plate. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes glistening with instant, horrified tears. "Chinik me," she whispered. "My God, no." Chief Adeyemi slowly rose from his chair. He did not shout. Not yet. His voice was a low, venomous tremor, the kind that precedes a tectonic shift. "What did you say?" It was not a question. Adesewa met his gaze, her own fear now a secondary thing, overshadowed by a newfound, ferocious calm. "I am pregnant. The baby is Chuka's." The name was the detonator. The earthquake hit. That boy! The roar was volcanic, shaking the crystal glasses on the table. He slammed his fist down, making the entire table jump. "That worthless, talentless, gutter rat. You let that nothing, destroy you, destroy this family?" "Alyamide, please," Nneka cried, her voice a desperate wail. "Calm down. Your blood pressure. Calm down?" He turned his fury on his wife, and for a terrifying second, Adesewa thought he might strike her. "My daughter is carrying a bastard child for a street urchin, and you tell me to calm down?" He whirled back to Adesewa, his finger jabbing the air between them. "You will get rid of it. Do you hear me? You will go to London tomorrow and you will take care of this problem." The cold, clinical brutality of the command stole the air from Adesewa's lungs. For a moment, she was too shocked to speak. Then, a protective fury, hotter and purer than any she had ever known, erupted from her very core. "No," she said, her voice shaking but unwavering. No, this is not a problem. This is my child. Your grandchild. That is no grandchild of mine, he thundered. It is a mistake, a stain on this family's name. I will not have it. I will not have you throwing your life away for some artist. He spat the word like a curse. Neka was sobbing openly now, her body shaking.
Adesua, Memi, please.
Listen to your father. Think of the shame, the scandal, our friends. What will they say? I don't care what they say. Adesua shot back, tears of anger and hurt finally springing to her eyes. I care about this baby. My baby. Your baby will have nothing. Her father roared, advancing around the table toward her. Do you understand me? Nothing. I will cut you off. I will disinherit you. You will not get a kobo. You and your poverty boyfriend can starve in the gutter where he belongs. See how much he loves you then. The words were meant to break her. They were designed to shatter her world. And they did. But not in the way he intended. They didn't break her resolve. They broke the last fragile thread of hope that he might ever understand. She stood up, facing him, her small frame dwarfed by his rage but unbent. Then that is what will happen, she said, her voice eerily calm now. But I am having this baby, with or without your blessing. The finality in her tone seemed to momentarily stun him. He stared at her, his chest heaving, as if seeing a stranger. His own daughter, his greatest asset, had become his greatest adversary. He took a step back, the fury in his eyes cooling into something harder, more dangerous. Utter contempt and cold, ruthless pragmatism. You think this is a game? He said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You think your little rebellion wins? Fine, have your bastard child. But you will not drag the Adeyemi name through the mud. He turned his back on her, walking toward the door. You will marry him. The statement was so shocking, so contrary to everything he had just said, that both Adesua and her mother stared in disbelief. What? Neka gasped. You will marry him, he repeated, stopping at the doorway without turning around. A quiet, private ceremony. No fanfare. No society pages. He will sign whatever papers my lawyers put in front of him. He gets nothing. Not a kobo of the Adeyemi fortune. Ever. The child will have our name, but he will not. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were as cold and empty as a deep well. That is my final word. You have made your choice. Now you will live with it, in the world you so clearly prefer. He walked out, leaving behind the shattered silence. Neka collapsed into her chair, weeping into her hands. The battle was over. Adesua had won, and it felt like the most devastating loss imaginable. She had her permission, but it was a punishment. She was getting her way, but she was losing her family. She stood alone amidst the ruins of the dinner, her hand instinctively cradling her stomach. The earthquake had passed. The landscape of her life was forever changed. And in the terrifying, quiet rubble, a new life was beginning to grow. The days that followed the earthquake were a cold, silent war. The Adeyemi mansion, once a symbol of opulent comfort, felt like a morgue. Conversations, when they happened, were clipped and functional, stripped of all warmth. Adesua's mother moved through the halls with red-rimmed eyes, a ghost of her former elegant self, speaking to her daughter only in monosyllables, her disappointment a palpable chill. Chief Adeyemi was absent, burying himself in his work and, Adesua suspected, the meticulous planning of his legal offensive. He had given his word, and a man like him did not go back on it, but he would ensure his terms were enforced with the rigidity of steel. The summons came a week later, a text message to Adesua's new, monitored phone. My office. 3 p.m. Bring him. There was no name, no greeting, just a command. Getting the message to Chuka was a feat of clandestine logistics, finally achieved through the brave, whispered help of a young housemaid who had always been kind to Adesua and who slipped a note into the grocery bag destined for a market vendor who was a cousin of a boy who attended the promise. Chuka's response, when it finally reached her, was just 2 words. I'll be there. At 2:55 p.m., Gabriel, the stern driver, pulled the black SUV through the gates of the Adeyemi Holdings headquarters, a towering glass monolith in the heart of Victoria Island that seemed to scrape the sky. Adesuwa sat in the back, her stomach a tight knot of anxiety. She had dressed carefully in a severe, high-necked black dress, armor for the battle to come. Chuka was waiting in the soaring, marble-lined lobby. He looked heartbreakingly out of place. He wore a dark suit, clearly new and slightly ill-fitting, bought for this occasion. He stood straight, his shoulders back, but his hands were clenched at his sides. When he saw her, his tense expression softened for a fraction of a second, a silent message of solidarity. They didn't speak. They were escorted by a silent, efficient assistant into a private elevator that whisked them up to the penthouse office. Chief Adeyemi's office was a testament to his power. A wall of glass offered a god's-eye view of Lagos. Polished mahogany, leather, and sleek chrome dominated the space. Awards, plaques, and photographs with world leaders adorned the walls. It was a room designed to intimidate, and it worked. The chief was not alone. Seated across from his vast desk was a man in an impeccably tailored suit. His expression neutral, a sleek leather document folder on his lap. Chief Adeyemi's personal lawyer, Mr. Bello. Her father did not rise. He barely acknowledged their entrance, finishing whatever he was reading before finally looking up. His gaze swept over them, lingering on Chuka's suit with a flicker of disdain before settling on his daughter. "Sit," he said, a command to a subordinate. They sat in the two chairs facing the desk. Chuka's knee brushed against hers, a small point of contact that felt like a lifeline. Chief Adeyemi leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I assume you understand why we are here," he began, his voice cold and businesslike. "A situation has been created. It will be resolved in a way that minimizes embarrassment." He nodded to Mr. Bello. The lawyer opened his folder with a crisp, professional motion. "Mr. Okeke," he began, his tone devoid of any humanity. "My client, Chief Adeyemi, has, out of an abundance of concern for his daughter and the unborn child, agreed to permit a marriage to take place." He let the condescension in the word permit hang in the air. "However," he continued, sliding a thick document across the polished desk towards Chuka, "this permission is contingent upon your unconditional agreement to the terms outlined in this prenuptial agreement." The document was dozens of pages long, dense with impenetrable legal jargon. "In essence," Mr. Bello said, as if explaining to a child, "this agreement irrevocably severs you, in perpetuity, from any financial interest in the Adeyemi estate. You will retain no claim to any past, present, or future assets, properties, trusts, or holdings of Adesuwa Adeyemi, outside of any assets you jointly acquire after the marriage. Any gifts given to her by her family remain her sole property. In the event of a dissolution of the marriage, you depart with nothing but your personal possessions. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement forbidding you from ever publicly discussing your relationship with this family." He placed an expensive pen on top of the document. "The terms are non-negotiable." It was a complete and total surrender, a renunciation of any claim, not just to wealth but to dignity. It was designed to be humiliating, to prove her father's point that Chuka was nothing but a gold digger who would balk when the gold was taken off the table. Adesuwa's heart ached. She wanted to scream, to grab the document and tear it to shreds. She looked at Chuka, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to not be offended, too. Chuka picked up the document. He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the pages. He held her father's gaze, his own calm and steady. "I have read many things in my life, sir," Chuka said, his voice clear and firm, cutting through the tense silence. "But I do not need to read this." Chief Adeyemi's eyebrow twitched. "Is that so?" "Yes," Chuka said. "I understand the terms. I am not marrying Adesuwa for your money. I fell in love with her long before I knew who her father was. I want to build a life with her, not live off the one you built for her." He picked up the pen. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look at the lines he was supposed to sign on. He simply turned to the last page, found the signature block, and signed his name with a firm, decisive hand. "Chuka Okeke." The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. He slid the document back across the desk toward the lawyer. "I am marrying Adesawa," he said, turning his gaze from the stunned lawyer back to Chief Adeyemi. "Not your fortune." For the first time since they had entered the room, Adesawa saw a crack in her father's icy composure. It wasn't respect. It was confusion, quickly masked by renewed contempt. He had expected negotiation, begging, or righteous anger. This quiet, confident acceptance was a move he hadn't anticipated. Mr. Bello quickly gathered the signed document, a faint look of surprise on his own professional mask. "The arrangements will be made," Chief Adeyemi said dismissively, turning his attention to a file on his desk, effectively dismissing them. "You will be informed." They were ushered out. The silence in the elevator was electric. Adesawa reached for Chuka's hand, her own trembling. He laced his fingers through hers, his grip strong and sure. Outside, in the blinding Lagos sun, she turned to him, tears finally welling in her eyes. "Chuka, I'm so sorry. That was—" He stopped her, turning to face her, his hands on her shoulders. "AIDS," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "Look at me. I told you. I don't want his money. I want you, and our baby. That paper changes nothing." He had walked into the lion's den and emerged not as prey, but as a man. He had signed away a fortune without a second thought, because in his eyes, he had already won the only thing that had any value. Her father had given them a condition, and Chuka had met it, not with submission, but with a quiet, devastating victory that left the great Chief Adeyemi, for perhaps the first time in his life, utterly speechless. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in cold, efficient logistics, orchestrated by Chief Adeyemi's office with all the warmth of a corporate merger. The wedding was to be a transaction, stripped of all joy, tradition, and celebration. There would be no fanfare, no society pages, no display of the Adeyemi wealth. It was to be a quiet, private, and utterly joyless affair. The Igbankwu, the traditional wine-carrying ceremony, was held not in the sprawling, decorated compound of the Adeyemi estate, but in a private room of a members-only club in Ikoyi. The air was thick with tension, not celebration. Chief Adeyemi and his wife sat on one side of the room, regal and unsmiling, a wall of silent disapproval. On the other side sat Chuka's family. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Okeke, were both school principals from Enugu. They were dignified people, dressed in their best traditional ISI Egu attire, but their eyes held a mixture of pride for their son and deep, uncomfortable bewilderment at the frigid atmosphere. Chuka's uncles and aunts sat with them, their cheerful, ready smiles slowly dying under the Arctic chill emanating from the Adeyemi contingent. The ritual felt hollow. When Chuka's family presented the symbolic gifts, kola nuts, palm wine, tubers of yam, they were received by the Adeyemi staff with a perfunctory nod, not the joyful acceptance it warranted. When it was time for Adesawa to search for Chuka among the crowd of men to offer him a cup of palm wine, her walk felt less like a beloved bride and more like a prisoner walking to her sentence. She found him instantly, his eyes the only warm, familiar thing in the room. His smile as he drank was small, meant only for her, a private rebellion against the gloom. The ceremony concluded without music, without dancing, without the raucous cheers that should have filled the air. The two families did not mingle. They departed in separate vehicles, the divide between them as wide and deep as the Niger River. The court wedding, a week later, was even bleaker. It was held in a sterile, white-walled room in the Ikoyi registry. The only attendees were Adesawa's parents, a single representative from Chuka's family, his stoic father, and two required witnesses from Chief Adeyemi's legal team. Adesawa had refused to let the day be entirely without meaning. Defying her mother's wishes for a neutral suit, she wore a beautiful, though simple, dress of cream-colored George fabric. It was not the extravagant, lace-trimmed creation she might have once dreamed of, but it was elegant and hers. And then there was the geli. The morning of the court wedding, a small, wrapped package had been delivered for her by a motorcycle courier. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a stunning geli of a deep cobalt blue oak, shot through with silver thread. There was no note, but none was needed. It was a gift from Chuka's mother. A silent, powerful message of welcome into their family. A splash of color and warmth in the coldness of her own. Tears had sprung to Adesuwa's eyes as her maid tied it for her. It was the first true act of kindness she had felt in weeks. At the registry, her parents looked like attendees at a funeral. Her father signed the necessary documents with the grim finality of signing a death warrant. Her mother wept quietly into a handkerchief, not tears of joy, but of mourning. Chuka, however, looked at Adesuwa as if she were the only person in the world. He wore the same new suit, but he wore it more easily now. His focus was entirely on her. His gaze steady and full of a love so palpable it felt like a shield against the surrounding bitterness. When the officiant, a bored-looking civil servant, pronounced them man and wife, there was no kiss. A simple, solemn hug. Her father's offered handshake to Chuka was so brief it was almost an illusion. As they walked out of the registry into the harsh afternoon sun, the reality of it all settled on Adesuwa's shoulders. There was no rice throne, no car decorated with ribbons, no cheering friends. Just the silent, looming presence of her parents and the waiting black SUV. Her father paused before getting into his car. He looked at Adesuwa, his expression unreadable. "Your things will be sent to the address you provided," he said, his voice flat. "Goodbye, Adesuwa." It was a dismissal, a severance. He got into the car and drove away without a backward glance. Her mother offered a frail, heartbreakingly sad smile before following him. And then they were alone, Adesuwa and Chuka, standing on the dusty curb outside the registry. Husband and wife. The silence was overwhelming. The grand, defiant romance had culminated in this. A stark, legal reality and a profound sense of isolation. Chuka turned to her. He didn't say anything. He simply took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. He raised her knuckles to his lips and kissed them gently. "Come on, Mrs. Okeke," he said softly, a new, wonderful weight to the name. "Let's go home." He led her not to a waiting car, but towards the busy street, flagging down a yellow taxi, the same kind she had taken to Surulere a lifetime ago. As they slid into the back seat, away from the oppressive world of Ikoyi, Adesuwa looked at her husband, at the kind, determined set of his jaw, and then down at their joined hands. It had not been the wedding of her dreams. It had been a simple, almost bleak Edo adjoining. But as the taxi pulled into traffic, taking them toward their new life, she realized the ceremony hadn't been the point. The point was the man beside her, who had chosen her over a fortune, and the future they would now build together on their own terms. The wedding was an ending, but it was also, finally, a beginning. Their new home was a 3-bedroom flat in a modest, well-kept building in Lekki Phase 1. To Adesuwa, who had grown up in a mansion with sweeping staircases and rooms the size of tennis courts, it was small. The first time she walked in, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of the Adeyemi estate. It was an empty silence, waiting to be filled. A single, large cardboard box sat in the middle of the bare living room floor. Contained her things. Her father had been true to his word. He had not sent her clothes, her books, or her art. He had sent a curated selection of what he deemed appropriate for her new station. A few simple outfits, some practical kitchenware, and her passport. It was a final, brutal message. The rest of her old life was forfeit. For a moment, she stood over the box, a wave of despair threatening to pull her under. This was it. This was the poverty he had promised. Then, Chuka came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her and resting his hands on her slightly swelling belly. "We don't need any of it," he murmured into her hair. "We have everything we need right here." He was right. They had a roof that didn't leak, a fact Chuka had checked meticulously. Windows that let in the bright Lego sun, and a blank canvas. This wasn't a punishment. It was the foundation. The first few weeks were a crash course in a life she had only ever observed from a distance. She learned to haggle with the market women at the nearby Mile 12 market, a skill she was hilariously bad at initially. Her polite "how much?" met with prices triple the normal rate. Chuka, a master negotiator, would have to step in, his easy grin and fluent pidgin English instantly getting them a fair deal on plantains and tomatoes. She learned to cook. Her first attempt at jollof rice was a smoky disaster that set off the fire alarm. Chuka, laughing, had opened all the windows and then patiently talked her through the process. His mother on speakerphone from Enugu adding cheerful tips. They ate slightly burnt rice that night, and it was the most delicious meal of her life. She learned the rhythm of his work. The flat's smallest bedroom became his studio. The smell of turpentine, acrylics, and sawdust became the scent of their home. She loved watching him work, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands transforming blank canvases into worlds of color and emotion. And she found her own role. Adesuwa, the MBA-educated heiress, became Chuka Okeke's manager. It was her genius. She used her knowledge of high society not to navigate it, but to subvert it. She knew what galleries to target, how to craft a compelling artist statement, and how to leverage the one thing she still had. The Adeyemi name, not as a beneficiary, but as an intriguing point of entry. Chuka Okeke, she would say on the phone, her voice crisp and confident, the same voice she'd used at board meetings. You may have seen his piece at the Adeyemi Foundation auction last year. She never said she was his wife. She let the connection hang in the air, a tantalizing mystery that made gallery owners curious enough to take a meeting. She built him a website, organized his portfolio, and meticulously tracked his commissions and expenses. They were a team. He was the heart, the creativity. She was the spine, the strategy. Money was tight. There were no trust fund deposits, no automatic allowances. They lived on what Chuka earned from his art and the occasional mural commission. They budgeted meticulously. A successful sale meant they could afford a nicer cut of meat for dinner and put the rest into savings for the baby. A lean week meant beans and plantain. They faced struggles. The landlord's nephew, a pompous young man who knew who she was, once came to collect rent and made a snide comment about how the mighty have fallen. Chuka had simply stepped in front of Adesuwa, his calm demeanor somehow more intimidating than anger, and said, "The rent is ready. Is there anything else?" The man had left quickly. There were moments of profound fear, lying awake at night wondering how they would afford hospital bills or a proper school. But in those moments, Adesuwa would feel the baby kick, a tiny, insistent flutter of life, and Chuka would pull her closer, and the fear would recede. They were building something, not just a family, but a life, a real one. The blisters on her hands from scrubbing their own bathroom were proof of it. The paint stain on her old t-shirt was proof of it. The shared joy over a paid-off utility bill was proof of it. The flat slowly transformed. They couldn't afford new furniture, so they bought second-hand pieces and Chuka sanded and repainted them in bright, bold colors. His art began to cover the white walls, each piece a story of their journey. The place was filled with music, his old guitar, the radio tuned to Naija FM. One evening, they were sitting on a blanket on their small balcony, sharing a bowl of popcorn and watching the sun set over the rooftops of Lekki. It was a humble view, nothing like the panoramic spectacle from her old penthouse. Adesuwa leaned her head on Chuka's shoulder. "I never knew I could be this happy with so little," she said quietly. Chuka kissed her forehead. "We don't have little aids. We have everything." She looked around at their tiny, colorful, love-filled flat. The gilded cage was a distant memory. This, with the smell of popcorn and the sound of his heartbeat under her ear, was not a fall from grace. It was the greatest freedom she had ever known. They were building their world, one brushstroke, one saved naira, one shared dream at a time, and it was already more beautiful than anything she had left behind. The pregnancy became the central, sacred project of their new world. Adesuwa's body, once meticulously maintained for elegance and poise, became a vessel of powerful, unpredictable change. The morning sickness gave way to voracious cravings for akara and sour agbalumo, which Chuka would happily venture out at odd hours to find. Their small flat filled with books on childbirth and parenting, bought secondhand from a roadside vendor, their pages filled with Chuka's doodles in the margins. They attended antenatal classes at a public hospital, a world away from the private, luxurious clinics of Ikoyi. Here, they were just Mr. and Mrs. Okeke, expecting their first child. They sat on plastic chairs alongside other couples, learning breathing techniques and swaddling methods. Adesuwa, for the first time, was not special because of her name, but simply because she was a mother-to-be. She loved it. Chuka was her rock. He massaged her aching feet after long days on her feet. He painted a magnificent mural of a baobab tree on the nursery wall, and he talked to her growing belly, telling stories about the world their child would enter. The fear of the medical bills was a constant, low hum in the background. Chuka took on extramural commissions, working late into the night after his studio work was done. Adesuwa, her belly large and round, managed his bookings with a ferocious efficiency, determined to meet their savings goal. The money was carefully set aside in a dedicated account, a testament to their partnership and sacrifice. The day the contraction started was a day of blazing sun. There was no panic, just a focused, serene urgency. Chuka, who had rehearsed the drive to the hospital a dozen times, was preternaturally calm. He grabbed their pre-packed bag, helped Adesuwa into their used Nissan Sunny, and drove with a steady certainty that belied the wild beating of his heart. The delivery was long and arduous. Adesuwa, who had been taught a lifetime of restraint, discovered a primal strength within herself she never knew existed. She screamed. She groaned. She squeezed Chuka's hand so hard he thought his bones might break. And through it all, he was there, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement, his face a mirror of her pain and her effort. When the final mighty push was over, the room was filled with a new, powerful sound. A strong, indignant cry that seemed to shake the very walls. "It's a boy," the midwife announced, her voice warm with triumph. She placed the squirming, slippery infant on Adesuwa's chest. Time stopped. The pain, the fear, the 16 hours of labor. It all vanished into a void, replaced by a love so vast and terrifying it stole her breath. He was perfect. 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a head of dark, curly hair, and eyes that, when they blinked open, seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages. Chuka was weeping, silent tears streaming down his face as he cut the cord, his hands trembling not with fear, but with awe. He wrapped his arms around both of them, his family, and pressed his lips to Adesuwa's sweaty forehead. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He's perfect. You're perfect." They named him Chukwu, God's will. It was a name that resonated with profound meaning. He was not a mistake, not a scandal, not a problem to be solved. He was a divine intention, a blessing that had chosen them against all odds and opposition. Bringing Chukwu home was the true beginning. Their small flat, which had once felt spacious in its emptiness, was now filled to bursting with his presence. Tiny vests and cloth nappies hung on a drying line on the balcony. The night was punctuated by his hungry cries and their sleepy, shuffling footsteps as they took turns comforting him. Adesuwa's parents, informed of the birth by a terse text message from Chuka, responded with silence. A few days later, a courier delivered an extravagantly large stuffed elephant and an envelope. Inside the envelope was not a card, but a check for a substantial amount, made out only to Adesuwa. It was unsigned, a test, a temptation, a reminder of the world they had rejected. Adesuwa looked at the check, then at her son sleeping in the crib his father had built. She thought of the sleepless nights, the shared laughter over a successful nappy change, the way Chuka sang old highlife songs to lull Chukwu to sleep. She took the check and the stuffed elephant, placed them back in the box they came in, and asked Chuka to drive her to the Promise Youth Center. She donated both to the children there. The elephant was greeted with joyous shouts. The check would fund a new roof and books for a year. She returned home feeling lighter, freer than she had in months. She had not just rejected the money. She had transformed it. She had taken her father's cold, conditional world and used it to fuel the warm, loving one she was building with her own hands. That night, as she nursed Chukwu, watching his tiny fist curl around her finger, she understood. The inheritance she was meant to protect wasn't made of money or oil blocks. It was made of love, resilience, and integrity. And it was a fortune she and Chuka were already passing on to their son. To Chukwu, God's will was their greatest masterpiece. Life settled into a new, beautiful chaos. Chukwu grew from a fragile newborn into a chubby-cheeked, curious toddler whose laughter echoed through the small flat like the most beautiful music. His first steps were a celebrated event, captured on Chuka's old phone and cheered on by a small audience of their neighbors who had become impromptu aunties and uncles. Adesuwa's world, once so vast and yet so confined, had shrunk in geography but expanded infinitely in meaning. Her days were a whirlwind of managing Chuka's growing career and managing an energetic little boy. She was a master of multitasking, negotiating a gallery commission on the phone while building a block tower with Chukwu at her feet. Chuka's reputation continued to grow. A major gallery on Victoria Island, the one Adesuwa had strategically targeted, offered him a solo exhibition. The show, titled New Foundations, was a critical and commercial success. The pieces were a powerful exploration of his journey. Love, fatherhood, building a life from the ground up. Critics praised its raw authenticity and unflinching joy. The Adeyemi name was never mentioned, but it hung in the air, a silent, intriguing specter that only added to the mystique. The success was a validation, but it was also a practical relief. The proceeds meant they could move from their small flat to a modest 3-bedroom house in a quieter part of Lekki. It had a small garden where Chukwu could play. It was still a world away from Ikoyi, but it was theirs, bought with every naira they had earned together. Through it all, the silence from the Adeyemi estate was a constant, cold presence. Gifts would arrive on birthdays and Christmas. Expensive, impersonal toys for Chukwu that were often too advanced for his age, and elegant, untouched dresses for Adesuwa that no longer fit her life. They were gestures of obligation, not love. Adesuwa continued her quiet ritual of donating them, refusing to let the ghost of her old life haunt their new one. The thaw, when it came, was not a dramatic event. It was a series of small, almost imperceptible cracks in the ice. It began with Nneka Adeyemi. The grief and shame that had initially consumed her had slowly curdled into a deep, aching loneliness. She missed her daughter. She ached to know her grandson. Her friends, while polite, spoke of their own grandchildren with a joy she could not share. Her life felt empty. She started to seek out information. She asked her driver to take her past the new house, just to see it. She saw Chukwu, a sturdy, happy little boy, chasing a butterfly in the small garden while Chuka painted on the porch. The image stayed with her. She began to discreetly follow Chuka's career. She read the articles about his exhibition, her heart filled with a confusing mix of pride and resentment. She saw the photo of him and Adesuwa at the opening. Adesuwa, glowing with a happiness Nneka had never seen in her, standing beside a man who looked at her not as a prize, but as a partner. The biggest crack was forged by Chief Adeyemi himself, though he would never admit it. A business associate, a man who collected art, mentioned the Okeke exhibition at a club meeting. Fascinating young artist, the man said. Married to that Adeyemi girl, isn't he? Quite the scandal at the time. But my God, the talent is undeniable. I bought 2 pieces. The value has already doubled. Chief Adeyemi had grunted, changing the subject. But later, alone in his study, he did something he never thought he would. He looked up Chuka Okeke online. He saw the artist's statements, written with intelligence and passion. He saw the prices his works were commanding. He saw a picture of a mural Chuka had done for a new children's hospital. The artist surrounded by beaming kids. He was not a boy. He was a man. A successful, respected man who was building a legacy of his own, without a single kobo of Adeyemi money. The rigid, cold anger that had sustained Chief Adeyemi for years began to feel heavy and futile. He had disowned his daughter to protect his legacy, and yet her husband was creating a respected name on his own terms. The punishment wasn't working. It was only punishing him. The final nudge came from an unexpected source. Toby from Harvard. He was in Lagos on business and requested a meeting. Over whiskey in the study, he said, "Sir, I saw Adesua recently. At a distance. She looks, well, truly happy. The boy, your grandson, is a sturdy little fellow. Looks just like her." He said it not with malice, but with a simple, observational honesty that struck Chief Adeyemi to his core. Your grandson. Later that night, Chief Adeyemi stood at his window, looking out over his dark, silent gardens. He thought of his own father, a poor farmer who had sacrificed everything to send him to school. He had built this empire for his family, to give them a better life. And now, his only daughter was living in a small house in Lekki, happy without any of it. For the first time, a question crept into his mind. Had he been wrong? He didn't say anything to his wife. But the next day, when Nneka tentatively suggested, her voice trembling, perhaps we could send for a photograph of the boy, he didn't refuse. He simply nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. It was a tiny crack, but it was enough. The ice had begun to break. The invitation to Tochukwu's 5th birthday party was not a formal card. It was a small, colorful drawing Tochukwu himself had made. A lopsided cake with 5 blazing candles, delivered by a trusted cousin to the Adeyemi estate gates with a simple note from Adesua. "You are welcome to come." It was an olive branch, fragile and extended without expectation. The day of the party dawned bright and clear. The small garden of the Okeke home was a riot of color and noise. Paper lanterns were strung between the trees. A rented bouncy castle shuddered with the energy of a dozen squealing children. And the air was rich with the scent of roasting suya and jollof rice from a large pot tended to by a hired caterer. It was a celebration filled with genuine, unpretentious joy. Adesua, dressed in a simple, beautiful Ankara wrapper and blouse, moved through the crowd, refilling drinks, laughing with the parents from the neighborhood and Chuka's artist friends. Chuka was the ringmaster of the children. His laughter loud and free as he organized a chaotic egg and spoon race. Tochukwu, beaming with pride in his new agbada, was at the center of it all, the king of his sunny, messy, wonderful domain. They came just as the cake was about to be cut. A sleek, black Mercedes-Benz S-Class glided to a stop on the quiet street. So out of place it seemed to suck the sound from the air for a moment. The passenger door opened, and Nneka Adeyemi stepped out, elegant in a subdued iro and buba, her eyes wide and anxious behind her sunglasses. Then the rear door opened, and Chief Olumide Adeyemi emerged. He stood for a moment, a monument of imported silk and solemnity amidst the vibrant, chaotic celebration. He looked older. The stern lines of his face seemed softer, etched not just with authority but with something resembling regret. The party faltered. Conversations died mid-sentence. The children, sensing the shift, stopped their screaming and stared. Adesua's heart hammered against her ribs. She wiped her hands on a napkin and walked towards them, Chuka instantly at her side, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture of unwavering support. "Daddy, Mummy," Adesua said, her voice steady. "You came." Nneka's eyes were already glistening, darting from her daughter's face to the scene behind her. We wanted to see the boy," she whispered. It was then that Tochukwu, curious and unburdened by the weight of history, toddled over. He stared up at the tall, serious man with a child's blunt assessment. "You're big," he announced. A strange sound, almost a choke, came from Chief Adeyemi. He slowly removed his sunglasses, and for the first time, Adesua saw not a titan of industry, but a grandfather looking upon his grandson. His stern gaze swept over the boy, taking in his bright eyes, his confident stance, the unmistakable echo of the Adeyemi lineage in his brow. "And you are Tochukwu," the chief said, his voice deeper and quieter than the surrounding noise. "Yes," the boy said proudly. "I am 5. Do you want to see my cake?" The simple, innocent invitation shattered the last of the tension. Nneka let out a soft, tearful laugh. Adesua felt Chuka's hand press more firmly against her back. Chief Adeyemi allowed the smallest of smiles to touch his lips. I would like that very much. They were ushered into the heart of the party. The guests, recovering, slowly resumed their conversations, though now with hushed, curious glances toward the newcomers. Neka was quickly drawn into a conversation with Chuka's mother, the two women finding common ground in their shared pride for their grandchildren. Chief Adeyemi stood slightly apart, a silent observer. He watched Chuka lift a squealing little girl, their second child, 2-year-old Ngozi, onto his shoulders. He watched the easy, comfortable way Chuka touched Adesuwa's arm as he passed her, a silent communication of love and partnership. He saw the vibrant, beautiful home they had built, not with his money, but with their own hands and hearts. He saw the respect in the eyes of their friends. He saw the profound, unshakable happiness on his daughter's face, a look he had never seen in all her years in his mansion. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Chief Adeyemi found Chuka by the suya grill, turning the meat. He stood beside him for a long moment, the two men side by side in silence, watching the flames. "You have made her happy," the chief said finally. The words were simple, but they cost him dearly. They were an admission, a surrender, and an apology all in one. Chuka looked at his father-in-law, not with triumph, but with a quiet understanding. "It is the easiest and most important thing I will ever do, sir," he replied. "She is my heart." Chief Adeyemi nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The sounds of the dying party, the laughter, the music, the joyful shrieks of children, washed over them. He placed a heavy, firm hand on Chuka's shoulder. The gesture was awkward, yet momentous. "You are a good man," he said, the words clear and deliberate. "You have built a good life, a strong life." He paused, the next words seeming to require a great effort. "You are now my son." It was more than acceptance. It was a blessing. It was an adoption. Later, as they prepared to leave, Neka pulled Adesuwa into a deep, warm embrace, holding her tighter than she had in years. "OBM," she whispered, her voice thick with tears of joy. "My heart, you chose well. This happiness, it is real. It is beautiful." She pulled back, cupping Adesuwa's face in her hands. "We are so happy for you. We give you our full blessing." Adesuwa hugged her back, tears streaming down her own face. The long winter was over. As the Mercedes pulled away, Tchukwu waved enthusiastically from the gate. From the back window, Chief Adeyemi waved back. Adesuwa turned and walked into her husband's waiting embrace. They stood together in their messy, love-filled garden, surrounded by the remnants of the party, watching the taillights disappear. The marriage, long a point of contention, was finally, completely, and unconditionally blessed. Not out of obligation, but out of love. Not because of a name, but because of the truth of the life built beneath it. The journey had been long and painful, but as Chuka held her, and their children played at their feet, Adesuwa knew every struggle had been worth it. They had not just won acceptance. They had, with patience and love, built a bridge across a great divide and brought her family home.